This is a test. This station is conducting a test of the emergency broadcast system. This is only a test. This concludes this test of the emergency broadcast system.
Right then, I've just been trying to finish the book. I haven't quite finished it. So there's about I think there's maybe like an eighth. So hopefully, if there's
nothing happens in the end. It's all right. I've covered everything. But
if there's any gaps in my knowledge, and that's what it is, I do intend.
Yeah. I'll forgive you. Yeah,
I do intend to go back and finish those bits.
Good.
I tweeted about it the other day.
I saw that. Thank you.
Yeah. It is very funny, and it made me think about lots of things. Why?
That's what books are kind of meant to do, I guess. In some, well, not necessarily to be funny, but I suppose they're meant to make you think a bit. I don't know.
Well, tell me about why you wanted to write this book.
It was kind of accidental, really. I hadn't been planning to write a book, but the editor of 9/8 Books, so they're putting out a lot of music books, sort of badgered me a bit and said, "You haven't written a book for a long time. Have you got any ideas?" And I had this idea kind of swirling around a little bit for a while, but I couldn't quite give it a sort of form. And it's in a way, it's kind of quite close to what I write in my record collector column. So I was kind of thinking, well, I've actually got. I didn't really want to do a memoir because I've done 2 volumes of that, and I don't want to. I'm not David Niven. No one cares. I don't care. I liked the idea of writing something that did combine sort of anecdotal bits with a sort of manifesto, if you like, which has been my manifesto through my life.
Well, I just wondered though as well. I mean, I know I'm referring to Twitter a fair bit. There's nothing. I don't think Twitter has very much to do with the notion of freakdom, but
no.
There was something that you tweeted that I thought it got me very excited when you tweeted it, and I think it was in response to some Guardian music article, and you were almost sort of like that. You were kind of railing against the sort of the moralism and how many rules there seem to be in music, and you were like, "I'm so pleased that I'm not a young person now." And I did wonder with this book whether there was just something you wanted to say about the conformity of whatever passes for rock and roll in the present age.
Well, without being like an old man shouting at the moon, which is really the last thing I want to be. I think we've been living in an epoch, if you like, of social cohesion, perhaps since the mid 90s. I think certainly since the early 2000s, where you've got things like Big Brother, which aren't, obviously they're nothing to do with rock and roll, but they are cultural. And Big Brother is like the ultimate kind of social cohesion experiment. And I think these things have just seeped into everything. I mean, to paint it with like very broad brushes, you got it's not really a pet bugbear, because I don't think about it very often, but Glastonbury is a classic example of, it's a thing. When I first played Glastonbury, I think it was kind of it was still the remnants of it just being like a festival. It wasn't like it wasn't really seen. I don't think it was seen as like the big kind of career move, but now it's become one of those career moves where it's like a level, and you have to kind of pass different levels to get to the next level, and then the ultimate level. And I'm not sure what the ultimate level is. What is that kind of bit? Just like selling 1 billion records, then touring forever. I don't know. What's the. I failed to see point. It's a bit like is this rock and roll or is this the Olympics?
Right.
Is this like the Premiership or is it rock and roll? Which is they're two in my mind. These are two very different things.
I mean, it's funny you say that about the mid-90s, and obviously, I've read Bad Vibes, so I'm very familiar with your views on that era. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a friend of mine who is around about your age, and he always credits the sort of the decline of weirdos in popular culture. He always syncs it with the Stone Roses because he's like, oh well, the Stone Roses invited the football lads into it.
Yeah, but they weren't themselves though. Ian Brown wasn't really that. If you look at him, he wasn't really that, was he? He's kind of quite out there, really. I mean, maybe he would be a freak. I don't know.
Well, I think the pandemic proved that there was definitely a free spirit freak side, to Ian Brown.
He's a cosmic kind of guy. That's generous.
Yeah. I mean, you do rail against sport in the book. I found that very funny. Even as a football fan, I could see where you were coming from. But I also liked your diversion into professional wrestling, of which I am a fan of. Do you still follow that stuff?
No, not anymore. It's something I left behind a long time ago. It was just something in my past, and I brought it up. It just came into my mind when I was making an album about it, and I realised it was just all there in front of me, and I just had, I'm not a great schemer, and I tend to do things kind of on a whim or out of just on a kind of an idea, and the idea was just to do. It just popped in my head as just sort of like, make album about. It was almost like Alan Partridge, Note to Self, make album about wrestlers from a psychedelic angle, and it was as simple as that. And it was just like, that's a great idea. I just do that. Is it a great idea? Who cares? But I'm doing it. So you have to you follow it through to the logical conclusion, which is to make the album. And of course, my dad used to take me to all those like wrestling bouts at the end of the 70s and the early 80s. So it was a big part of my childhood, and I guess my relationship with my dad.
You write about your dad. I mean, I've interviewed quite a lot of musicians recently I feel like there's like a lot of musician memoirs, that are written by men. Ultimately, they're things they wish they'd said to their dad. But your dad, your relationship with your dad comes across as really tender. There's a lot of love for your dad in the book.
Oh yeah. Well, he was an actual eccentric. And he was very much a man of his time. He was sort of like a comedy character out of a 70s sitcom, and he had he was just really quite eccentric, and everyone thought he was very eccentric, which could be, to me as a kid, could be very, very embarrassing. And very mortifying, because he continued to be eccentric for all of his life. It didn't ever stop at any point. It just continued. And I think he gave me a sort of spirit of you do what you want. You're your own person all the time. He had that very strongly, even though he didn't become the things that he wanted to be. And in a sense, I think there was a kind of a feeling of failure for him. Certainly when he was dying, because he would talk. This gets a bit grim, but he would sort of talk about that, about unrealized ambitions. That what he really wanted to be was an artist, but he just then, well, not just, but he ended up doing kind of doing graphic designs of Polaris missiles and all that kind of stuff.
I thought that was dead interesting. I mean, it sounds, it still sounds like quite an interesting job, actually. But I'm a bit of a, as you say in the book, I mean, I'm approaching my mid-40s, and I'm reading a lot of books about World War II.
Oh yeah. Well, keep going.
All the Portsmouth stuff was fascinating as well. I mean, my dad was in the Navy, so he was.
Oh, it was okay, right? Interesting. Right.
And my one of my older brothers as well was on nuclear subs, so there was a lot of days out to Portsmouth Historic Shipyard as a child.
Fun times, fun times.
So whenever anyone criticises Portsmouth, as you do in the book quite brutally, I'm always like, well, it's like Disneyland to me because it's where I used to go look at the ship.
Well, did you live there? No, you didn't live there.
Exactly. That seems to be the difference there.
Well, I wouldn't be. I mean, I wouldn't be against. These days, I'm not really kind of for dishing it out against some town because it's not what I think places should be. Because people kind of, a town is made up of all the people in it and all that kind of thing. He says very kind of liberally. But I think as I lived there. In the sort of early 80s, it wasn't really the sort of place I wanted to be.
Yeah,
let me tell you, I think I kind of have at least some sort of right to be saying these things.
Oh no, and I imagine that your rib cage and the kickings from maybe off-duty sailors, maybe you've earned the right, to.
Yeah. It was more kind of. I mean, it wasn't so much. It's the sort of you kind of learn where not to go because of off-duty sailors, but it was more the kind of kick-ins were more sort of from skinheads at school. That terrible time which you're too young to remember, but 1980, 81 was a horrible time to be at comprehensive school.
Well, I'm going to get there, but just before we do, when we're talking about your dad, what's the difference between an eccentric and a freak?
Well, I think an eccentric doesn't have to sort of like necessarily be kind of doing making art or anything. You can be an eccentric, just as you could be a freak. But I think there's a freak is kind of on a mission sometimes, whereas an eccentric can just be sort of like pottering away. I mean, I'm giving this a very broad idea, but my dad wasn't. I think he wanted to be an artist. He didn't quite have the vision thing. He was a very good artist, but he was more just sort of eccentric in his manner and in some of his views. And just the way he would be, he was kind of a loner, but very sociable. Would be the funniest guy in the room, but wouldn't necessarily need friends, that kind of thing, so I'd had very sort of straight, the very kind of strict rules in his head about, what was and what wasn't. He didn't really like pop music that much. He was too old, really, because remember, we now live in this insane world where, when you're like 70, you can still be like forming your first band.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you don't have to. You don't have to get old, and I think that's a lot of. I think that's actually a lot of the problem. If I'm being honest with you, I think there's something. I say this. Like I say, I'm gallivanting towards my mid-40s, but there's still part of me that's excited about new video games, and I find that faintly obscene. If I'm being honest with you, I'm almost pleased that my dad is dead, that he can't judge me for that.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah. Because I mean, I sometimes think that's actually where the resentment of a certain generation comes from, where they're like, "Hang on a second." It's like footballers that played before the advent of the Premier League, and footballers made a lot of money. They're like, "Hang on a second." Like, yeah. Anyway,
Jimmy Hill and the what was it, the minimum wage, or all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for someone who doesn't like sport, that's a good little bit of knowledge you've imparted there.
Well, I know things about sport. I just don't like it.
Yeah. I don't think football falls into the category of sport, but that's maybe one for a different time.
This might be a different podcast. I might start getting very out of my depth.
Yeah, that could be your next book, though. Actually,
yeah.
I love. I was born in 1980. You're late 60s, right?
1967. I was born.
So I'm really fascinated by. I'm fascinated by the 70s. Like I say, I had two older brothers, so I sort of grew up, even though I was growing up in the 80s and all of the shininess and the pizzazz of that era. I kind of grew up in a 70s household because I was playing with their toys and reading their annuals, their sort of adventure annuals and all that. I'm dead fascinated by the 70s because in lots of ways it feels like an incredibly creative era where people could be anything they wanted to be, but it also feels a little bit like there were perverts hanging around in every doorway. You know, it's like you watch Top of the Pops and you're a bit like, there's bad things happening backstage.
Well, I was very well. Never really got that. I mean, I think that was very much post. I don't know anyone. Well, obviously people within the music business, but I was a kid, so I didn't know about those things. But what I do remember, apart from that, the obvious kind of Dominic kind of Sandbrook type things, which I won't kind of go into, but the darker things. I hate that word, but I do remember. I've written about it quite a lot anyway, musically and in various bits and bobs. But the Yorkshire Ripper cast a big kind of shadow across my mind because that was all going on, and I was very disturbed when I heard the Wearside Jack tapes, which they played on the news quite a lot. And this was a terrifying thing to hear. And it was then even weirder when you kind of found out that this was someone impersonating the Yorkshire Ripper. Why would you do that? That was kind of mad. I've kind of written about all this stuff, but things like flashers in the park were just like they were just like dirty old men in park. And they were kind of seen as my parents. It was just sort of like something quite funny, and it wasn't a kind of great worry. It was just sort of like, laugh at them and run off. It wasn't like they're gonna like put you in a van and whatever. It wasn't that kind of thing. It was so there was an accepted kind of bleakness. I think let's use the word bleakness rather than darkness.
I think what I meant more, and you've articulated it really well, is it just feels like there was a real kind of grottiness of the era, which is weird. It's sort of a weird juxtaposition when you've got like Bolan like strutting his stuff on Top of the Pops and Bowie, kind of becoming what he is and stuff. It's so interesting to me how, it's like I've had conversations with my mum about Savile, right? That's the sort of light, the light conversations that we have. And she's just like, yeah, but loads of men were like that then. There was loads of that.
Yeah.
Do you know?
I think there was a lot of kind of slightly sinister men, because my dad was a member of the Lions Club, which was a kind of I don't know if you know about the Lions Club, but the Lions Club was a kind of Rotary club. So it was like it was sort of like quite it would be kind of sort of made good builders, self-employed builders, that kind of thing, who had a kind of charitable club, and they'd sort of do things for, they'd have, it sounds really sinister as I'm saying it, but they'd have kind of like charitable events for like the sick kiddies and all that kind of thing. And I wasn't one of the sick kiddies, thank God, but I'd go along, with my dad and sit there, and there'd be like people making speeches, and there were these older men who were kind of quite boisterous, and perhaps didn't have a great manner with kids, and were quite sort of quite hard fellas, and it was just a bit like that. I mean, I'm not saying it was all like that. I mean, a lot of it was. I mean, my upbringing was kind of different. So I didn't, apart from Top of the Pops, we didn't really have pop music in my house. So my mum and dad would listen to kind of like crooners, from the late 50s. I mean, they were married in 1956, so it was another world.
Yeah, no, totally. I guess what I'm sort of trying to say is I feel like, and I can't quite recall exactly how you describe it in the book, but there's a really nice turn of phrase where you're sort of talking about how kind of things look when they're, almost like how ugly they've looked as those sort of crevices have been illuminated in sort of more supposedly enlightened times. And I guess my thing is that I really feel like that's a job that needed to be done. And, who's to say in 10, 20 years, like we'll be doing it about the noise or whatever. There's plenty there. I think that you know, you could critique. But I also do fear a little bit for the sort of, I don't know, I don't really want music and cultural and creative spaces to be moralistic. I don't want it to be Soviet. Like, I feel like
No.
for freaks and weirdos, which I always was led to believe this was about, for those people to thrive and make art that isn't it isn't constrained by fear.
Well, I'm very much.
Can we ever get there?
Yeah, I think so. I'm very much of the mindset that the art and the artist are different things, and I think if you're looking at it from a kind of freak perspective, if you want to look at it like that, which I think we should, I think you've got to look at the art as kind of being visionary, almost like the artist isn't responsible for the art. The art is just there, floating in a kind of cosmic halo somewhere, and the artist is just picking it out. And the artist could be anyone. And I think that also gets away from the kind of male genius thing. It makes everything just more righteous, and in a way more egalitarian. Rather than just sort of like there are the special people who can do this, which I don't really buy into that anymore. I've been down that kind of, I mean, I was brought up with the kind of, as soon as I started, getting into rock and roll and being in bands, there was various people older than me going on about so and so being a genius, hello, Alan McGee.
yeah.
Alan's fine. Me and Alan are all right now, and Alan's a very gracious man. But all of that, I've seen all of that thing, and I'm not really convinced it's the right word.
Do you think? I mean, this is I almost sort of don't know whether I want to hear the answer to this, and I
probably don't.
I fear that I actually think what I'm sort of floating here. I wonder if you are a freak and you've got, you feel like you want to change the world, and you feel like doing music is that there's nothing else you could do, which I think is also part of being a freak. I wonder whether you play music now. Like, I wonder whether you're actually like, I do see freaks on Twitter. I read things that are written by freaks, but they don't have a lot to do with. Well, they don't have anything to do with music. And you sort of bring it round at the end of the book when you introduce Billie Eilish, and I can see where you're coming from there. But the book doesn't do a lot of. It really establishes what a freak is, but it doesn't do a lot of. This is where they are in our culture now.
Yeah. I think that's very difficult. I think. Because in the world of music, as far as I can tell, you can't go out. You can't be like a bunch of chancer kids. Go out and get some guitars, or go out and get some keyboards or some samplers, whatever. Go out and get like a trumpet, whatever. You can't go and do that, and you can't kind of get in a van, and you can't make a little bit of money out of it to get you to the point of making an album. You can do tours, and you can kind of explore this thing, i.e. you can't be a bit of a kind of and everybody had to do this, be a bit of a chancer and be a little bit wily about this, and you could get a bit of money out of people who had a bit of money. It was almost a bit criminal. I always liked the fact there was a bit of kind of criminality to it, and you could kind of do what you're doing. And when I used to get an advance, I didn't give a shit whether it was recoupable or not. I just used to think of it as free money, which, as it turned out to be, it has been. But I think it's very hard to do that now. I think it'd be very hard to kind of, because I see young people, perhaps quite right. I don't know, quite rightly kind of moaning that, it's really difficult being a musician, blah, blah, blah. There are no venues and all this kind of stuff, and you can't make we all have to have jobs and all that kind of thing. And you can't be a rock and roll band with jobs. You just can't do it. It's not viable. And we would have put any band I was in, I wouldn't have allowed anyone to have a fucking job. You're not in the world of employment with me, sunshine. But speaking of freaks, I mean, I think they're out there. I was on the tube yesterday, and this fella started talking. Weird people often start talking to me. and I like it. I like the kind of crazy people on tubes. And he had like he's like a Scottish fella, and he had two big bags of vinyl that he was taking. He would have said, "Do you want to have a look at them?" And I was like, "Okay, yeah, great, whatever." And I was looking through. It's got, it's all like the kind of stuff you'd expect, like Thin Lizzy albums and old Rod Stewart albums. He said, "It's breaking my heart. It's breaking my heart. Yeah, I've got to go to Cheltenham races, and this is I've got to fund it by doing this." And he'd obviously, he was had kind of few bruises on his faces and all this on his face and kind of stuff like that. So we went through. I was saying, well, good luck with that. And he said, would you help me pick the winners? So I went through like the racing post with him. And we picked a few winners, hopefully. And I think people like that are the real freaks,
Yeah.
They're kind of like, they're not really welcomed in society in any way.
Yeah.
And there is a thing about, well, how close, if you're a freak, how close are you to being, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about, sort of visionaries, or are we talking about homeless people, sort of shouting about stuff that they may well believe the stuff they're shouting, they may well be seriously disturbed. I don't know, but they may be right as well. Do you know what I mean?
Well, this sort of leads me on to what I was going to ask you, is that I feel a little bit, because again, the modern era, we're all apprehensive about what we say. No, there's not a lot of time for intent, I don't think, for an understanding of what is trying to be said. But
nuance.
Yes, I don't even know what that means, nuance anymore. But I'm gonna give this a go. So I should say that I have a mental illness. I have OCD. I do some crazy things, right?
Yeah.
And it's the bane of my life. However, I can't stand this sort of the attempt to classify everyone through the lens of how their brain works, right? Like the idea of neurodiversity, for example, I struggle with a little bit. It almost feels like people are describing the plot to the X-Men, like I'm different because... And I wonder whether that's actually got something to do with the absence of freaks within... I mean, I take your argument that it's economic in a way, but I also wonder whether there were people who you've written about in the book that, were they around today, they would be maybe saying, oh, well, this condition explains how I am. Whereas actually, without that, they were just freaks.
Yeah, exactly. And there would have been, people like maybe someone like, Steve Peregrine Took, there would have been a kind of who are about record company care of duty,
Yeah.
those kind of people. And there was none of that, obviously. Is that I think I mean, I suppose the big difference is I always saw rock and roll. I use that, you know what I mean, but I'm using the word rock and roll very broadly. It's like, to me, it describes most sort of culture and pop music, certainly. But I always saw rock and roll as a place where I could go, a sort of, it was like a safe haven for me, a safe place for me, because I knew I was kind of, I knew I had thoughts, or my brain was acting in a different way from some of the other kids at school, which didn't mean I was special or anything like that. It's just that I kind of liked the way my brain was acting, but this was the immediate place. This was like, well, this is where I go. This is my home here, and so I don't know if that's available to people now. I don't mean available in a kind of like, this is like a mental health kind of initiative. I just mean that.
Yeah. No, I absolutely. To be honest, in recent years, it's the first time I've really questioned it, where I've actually been like, oh, should I be, hanging out on Reddit forums with, I don't know, people who are interested in tanks, you know what I mean? Is that actually where odd people go now, rather than actually picking up a guitar and forming bands?
I think you might find that they might just be kind of the norm, But all that stuff,
But I did always feel like, I mean, when did you start to maybe think that music was a place for squares rather than freaks?
probably almost probably within about a year of me starting to get any kind of like success within the auteurs. It became quite, but that was a sort of, again, a cultural change. I think I think a lot of that was a reaction to Thatcher. I've said this before. I don't know if I write about it in the book. I can't remember. I've written about it before and I've thought it before, but I think that whole kind of 90s thing, and we shouldn't get too bogged down in that because I've been there many times, but I think that 90s thing was a reaction from young men who'd grown up through the Thatcher years, feeling emasculated by this sort of dominant woman. And so we got all these sort of lads, so-called lads, people like the most ridiculous people like James Brown, who's the most ridiculous sort of version of a lad I've ever seen. I mean, nothing against James really, but, you're trying to kind of pull that one over my eyes a bit.
It's really weird, and proof that life is a simulation. I did a Q&A with an author last night in Walthamstow, and James Brown was there, and the first time I've spoken to him in a long time. So
yeah, there you go.
That's my way out of the. He might come on the podcast soon, so
we can ask him.
That's me saying that's what Luke's saying, not what I'm saying, James.
Right? Yeah. I don't mind. Yeah.
That's what I was doing there. No. Yeah, without getting too mired within Britpop though, and
yes, that's what I meant.
And that in the mid-90s. I mean, I do feel even, when I first started. I mean, I was nuts on Nirvana, and then I heard Pulp on the radio, and I think it was Lip Gloss, and I was like, oh, this is amazing. And then very quickly, I was like, oh, and what's happening here then? Like this is it, and I suppose that's that. With hindsight, that's that. I bought Lenny Valentino, and I liked Denim, and I liked Saint Etienne. So I suppose what I'm talking about is almost like there is a moment before Britpop where it does feel a little bit like the Freaks might win.
Absolutely, yeah. I don't know if it was about winning, because once you start, when I wrote about the Beatles in the book, that's about the Freaks. You don't really want the Freaks to win, otherwise they're not freaks anymore.
Right.
We're stuck in this kind of freak purgatory, which is the way it should be. Doing our freak thing.
But because you're friendly with Jarvis, right? I mean, you do write a few, sort of social interactions in the book. Was there not something? Because a lot of their schlock in the 90s was like the Freaks have won.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, Jarvis is the real thing. Obviously, they all were. They're all the real deal, and they hit it big, quite rightly, and they struck a chord. Whether Jarvis would rather not be that person, I don't know. I don't know him well enough to say, but I suspect he might not want to be that sort of all recognizable person. But that's the take, I guess.
But in relation, I mean, I think the thing with Jarvis is that so much of the art that he's made after that era suggests that he actually, he didn't like kind of being kind of what he became or what people thought he was. But I guess with you, I mean, I'm a fan of the Auteurs and I'm a fan of Black Box Recorder, and now that we've got the opportunity to speak, I do think you should be contacting self-esteems people and asking for some kind of kickback on what she does, because every time I hear her, every time I hear her, I think she must have heard Black Box Recorder.
I don't know. To be honest, I haven't. I mean, I know who she is and all that. But I don't know. It hadn't struck me, but maybe I haven't heard enough.
Oh man, honestly, every time she's on the radio, I'm like, why are they playing "The Facts of Life" by Black Box Recorder?
Really? Okay.
And loads of people have said this as well. So I'm sorry to self-esteem, but you might make a few quid out of that. But what I'm trying to say is, did you? You're kind of saying that you realised quite quickly that this wasn't a place for freaks, right? But was there part of you that? I think what I'm trying to say by saying that I'm a fan of those bands is that you make great music. Was there part of you that it was self-sabotage, as in well, I don't want any part of this then. Whereas someone like Jarvis seemed like he could, you know, he could kind of mold himself a little bit to be a pop star.
Yeah, it's what you want to do and who you are, isn't it? Really, it's quite, you know, it's quite. He seemed to like naturally want to do it, and quite naturally didn't like certain ways that things were going. I didn't really have the kind of personality to do it, and I think, and sometimes outwardly I can appear to be harsher than I really am. Um, uh, and so some people are just good at that, and that's one that I don't think I was particularly good at that. You know, because I'd never really, well, I'd never, none of the bands I'd even liked, apart from maybe like Bolan and Bowie, but that's a kind of different thing. But none of them had really, but the bands I was really into weren't really pop bands, and they weren't really pop stars. So it's kind of inevitable that, you know, if you like that kind of stuff, you're suddenly not going to become, you know, whoever, Oasis or whatever. You know, I mean, but you know, you know, in the whole gamut of these things, you've got to have the pop bands. So I didn't really mind that. But I think the only thing, and again, not to get stuck in the Britpop thing, I think one of the worst things that happened was when, I can't remember, it was the NME or the Melody Maker, had this kind of like fantasy football league of band, and you thought, oh no, you so missed the point of all rock and roll. That was Steve Sutherland, obviously. And it's like, you've so missed the point of everything. Where do you start? Where do you begin with this? You know, it's like if anyone was so fucking stupid.
I'm gonna have to get Steve Sutherland on the podcast at some point, because every time I speak to someone who plied their trade within a particular era, it always ends up with them pillaring Steve Sutherland. And I used to work for Steve Sutherland, so I feel like at some point I really need to. I sort of know him, but he wouldn't give a fuck. Actually, I'm pretty sure he wouldn't.
Of course he would. No.
What are you? Was there anything? I'm trying to work out how to say this. Was there anyone? You are quite an acerbic writer. Is there anyone you've ever written about? And you know, and I think that's why your writing is engaging and funny. But have you ever written anything about anyone and they've been upset about it? Well, okay, but that's a good extra question. Have you ever regretted it, and have you ever had anything where the blowback has been real, as in someone's been upset about it and wanted to have it out with you?
Not so much that. The only one, not really. I mean, even when I wrote Bad Vibes, a lot of people had quite a good sense of humour about it. I'm sure some didn't. But there you go. But the only one I ever really regretted writing something bad about was Martin Carr, who Martin's a lovely fella.
Yeah.
But I think we just met on we had a very unpromising meeting, where we were both probably, well, I certainly was being a bit of an arsehole at the time. And I think he probably said, I think we've exchanged emails about it, and I think we're all right these days. And I quite admire him anyway. But we just had an unpromising meeting, and I think I went to town on him a bit in the book. But it's because I was kind of, I mean, there's no excuse for it really, but I was kind of writing it as a comedy. And so when you kind of write, I was kind of compressing things. So obviously my whole experience in the 90s wasn't like that as it is portrayed in Bad Vibes. There were long, boring periods where kind of quite good things happened. But no, I don't want to write about them. No one wants to write about them. And you can't make them funny, really. You know, when things are going swimmingly, you can't, it's hard. Well, I don't know how to make it particularly funny. You know, we have a great, we have a great 6 months and it's all nice. And then, we go out for dinner with Elvis's lawyer and all this kind of stuff. It's not, no one gives a shit. It's not funny. It's funnier, it's funnier, whatever, me, falling down a hole or whatever,
I mean, you were saying before that you almost like the perception of you is quite different to the reality of you. I mean, as my wife,
yes and no. I mean, I can be quite harsh as well, but I mean, I just mean outwardly. Sometimes my resting face can be looking far angrier than it actually is.
I mean, I was quite nervous about speaking to you. I'll be honest with you, and
Hmm.
I've definitely, as I've got older, I've mellowed out. But like when I was younger, I
Mm.
definitely had views that
Mm.
that are akin to those that you share in the book. Like
Mm.
that Glastonbury is for wankers, and
Mm.
no one who you should ever listen to would wear shorts. That those were things that
Yeah,
I would glibly say to anyone. And I ruined plenty of parties by going into tirades of
about
batshit
shorts.
theories. All the time, all the time. That was my
You walk in,
20s.
you walk into a room and start castigating people wearing shorts.
But also, there's also things like, occasionally I meet friends from my 20s, and I'll be talking, I'll say something about the Beatles, and they'll be like, well, you don't like the Beatles. And I'm like, well, quite clearly, I fucking love the Beatles. They're maybe the best band that aren't the Ramones. But they'll
Yeah,
be like, yeah, but I remember you like berating me for liking the Beatles, because it was just some bullshit I decided that I thought in my
yeah,
20s.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
but
yeah.
you seem quite nice, Luke. I'm
Well,
quite
I'm a 56-year-old man. I'm not with children
well.
and stuff like that. I'm not a kind of. I'm not sort of. I don't know. Whatever. Like I'm a monster running around with a sort
Well,
of. Firing my guitar at people.
well, I see. I understand why I understand why I was a bit contrary, or I was quite,
Mm,
aggro. I guess when I was younger. I
mm, mm.
understand, and I won't bore you with it. But when did you when did you become nice?
I've always been okay, but I mean, I think you were. I think the thing is when I was sort of flirting with sort of uh, not being a pop star, but when I suppose it's kind of what you would call my sort of imperial phase, which would have been the auteurs. I was quite happy to run with it and kind of like, go, yeah, okay, fun. I'm gonna have some. And my fun was kind of to be a bit of a motherfucker and play some mind games, do all that kind of stuff. Generally, because I think pop stars are allowed to be assholes. We want our pop stars to be to be assholes. There's nothing wrong with the pop star being an arsehole. I respect pop stars who are assholes.
But that's
But generally, when the thing I found though is that whilst I don't think fame has ever improved anybody at all in the history of everything, the history of fame and celebrity, no one has actually been improved by being famous. Um, Most musicians who are sort of like get into their make it through the sort of like the dodgy bits and get to their 50s are fairly wise and have seen a few things that maybe other people haven't seen, and they're usually quite nice. I find, for better want of a better word.
I mean, I suppose that kind of loops us back to what we were talking about before. You were saying about, people don't want their pop stars to be nice. I think the problem is at some point people want their pop stars to be nice. And I think that maybe
Mm.
explains, it's one reason why Taylor Swift is as popular as she is. She's almost kind of like an avatar for whatever you kind of want her to be in a
Yeah,
sense.
I think
And
they wanted. I don't know if it's so much nice, but I kind of get where you're going. But I mean, I think they wanted them to become every man or every woman, rather than someone who was maybe people who were kind of a bit difficult to get a handle on, or looked a bit strange, or didn't were kind of a bit wrong, and they wouldn't have fitted into anything else other than kind of people who probably wouldn't. You couldn't really imagine them getting like a job, you know.
yeah, yeah.
you
We,
know.
I can't stand the music, but I always have a bit of a soft spot for that kid from the 1975,
Yeah.
Matt Healy, because
Mm.
he just he just constantly fucks up. Like he's like Frank Spencer or something. It's like
Mm.
he just says things, and I'm like, I can't believe you said that. But not that
Mm.
it's in any way anything of any great wit or wisdom, but
Mm.
it's almost like he's trying to find the boundaries, these
Yeah.
very stifling boundaries that kind of the modern age has imposed on artists.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I don't. I'm almost as lost on him as I am on self esteem. I'm aware of his what he gets of his antics a little bit, what he gets up to is Mischief. But it just seems like a kind of a little bit of a. I mean, it's not for me. I mean, but he seems like a kind of a bit of a sort of minor nuisance.
Exactly. I feel like this
he needs his mum to sort of like give him. His mum's Denise Welsh, shouldn't she? From so he needs his mum to give him a talking to, I think.
I feel like this should be your next book, by the way. It should be
who need a talking to from their mum.
Well, more, you were saying about being an old man shouting at the moon. I feel like the cover should be you in your suit and in your hat, grow back your handlebar moustache.
Yeah.
It can be you kind of shaking your fist at the moon and just reviewing contemporary pop acts.
Well, there's stuff I hear that's all right. There's very little. I have very little bandwidth, as they say these days, for so much stuff. There's so much stuff sort of spewing out. If you and I don't. It's not my job to know that kind of stuff. I bought, weirdly, the best thing I bought in the last 20 years, which was new, was that Milkweed album.
Yeah.
It's only 9 minutes long. It's great. Yeah.
I can't believe you got me to listen to the Shadows for about an hour yesterday.
And are you number one fan of the Shadows? Not quite.
Well, see, it's interesting because when I was a kid at school and like everyone was forming bands and they would do like little gigs in the youth club and stuff.
Yeah.
If a band turned up and like did a Shadows cover, I'd be like, well, you're a square, because we're doing Nirvana covers. But
yeah,
I love the argument, but. I say this to say that I play guitar and I have never, and I know this for a fact, I have never played the riff to Apache.
You're a liar.
No, I knew you were going to say that. But
You're a goddamn liar.
I might learn it now. How often do you play the riff to Apache?
I tell you what, when I can sometimes when I pick up a guitar. I was doing this the other day, and I was playing FBI by the Shadows.
Amazing.
In a rehearsal with some people I play with. I just started playing, FBI. But I play, I like to play a bit of Apache,
Are you still playing in Swell Maps?
Yeah, we're doing a gig on about a week, 2 weeks time, something like that. Yeah.
Where's that? What in London?
Moth Club. Yeah.
Oh, that's just around the corner for me. I might come to that.
You should come along. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Also, there's plenty of there's lots of war memorabilia in there as well. So I can have a nice time watching a band I really like, and then go look at some photos.
Oh, actually, what you mean with Swell Maps? There's war memorabilia.
No, in Moth Club.
Oh right, okay. Well, the Swell Maps, all the lyrics are about like war memorabilia.
Oh, what a night out! What a night
all,
out!
All Nicky Sud never wrote about was like sort of like bits about Swedish submarine battalions and stuff like that. It was
amazing. Well, I know my favorite kebab shops across the road from Moth Club as well. So that sounds
great night out.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, listen, Luke, thanks so much for writing the book.
Thank you.
I can't remember the last time I laughed as violently as I did at several chapters in it.
Well, I'm glad. Yeah.
I will get it finished, and hopefully there'll be more mirth to come. So, thanks so much for speaking to me. So it's the end of March, isn't it?
Yes, 28th, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I will check that, and I will confirm that in the intro.
Please do. Yeah. Please do.
Well, so nice to speak to you. Don't be too nice. Like I like how nice you are, but don't. Let's keep some kind of. There's
always an edge, my friend. There's always an edge.
Nice to speak to you, man. Take care of yourself.
Thank you.